Welcome back to Fox 23 in Focus. With us now, Executive Director of the Center for Law and Justice, Dr. Alice Green. Dr. Green has a doctorate in criminal justice and advanced degrees in social welfare and education. She's also served as Deputy Commissioner of the New York State Division of Probation and Correctional Alternatives and as the Legislative Director of the New York Civil Liberties Union. Welcome, Dr. Green.
Thank you.
I'm glad you could be with us this morning.
Oh, yeah,
Dr. Green, we spent some time talking with people out on the streets, and the feedback that we got when we were doing our interviews on the streets were that many people really seem to feel that life for those incarcerated is a very fortunate experience, and that the prisons really do cater to people, and that for some people it's really their lifestyle is enhanced while they're serving time. And I know that Governor Pataki has made lots of budget cuts, but hasn't really been cutting in our prisons. And the idea is that if we build more prisons, we're going to reduce crime. What do you think? Is that the way to go?
Well, it's certainly not the way to go. The prison system does work. It works in the sense that it causes people to become more dependent. It certainly impacts on the families of those people who are incarcerated. The prison experience is not a good one. I go to prison all the time. Loss of liberty is a very serious thing. But people do come back into communities, and it depends upon what happens to them while they're in the prison. That will have some relationship to public safety and the communities from which these people come. So, and we're also talking about two prison systems. I noticed that one of the young people that you had interviewed talked about the fact that some people are given longer sentences than others. And I think that's true. Our system tends to discriminate against people of color. If we look at the New York State prisons, of course, we see that something like 85% of them, prisoners, happen to be African American or Latino. And that's no accident. I think we use prisons to control certain groups, and also it's become really a prison industrial complex where a lot of people benefit from having a lot of people in prison. There are people who build prisons, who make money. There are people who work there, provides jobs, many kinds of jobs, and there's all kinds of services. So with people who run the prisons, there's really no incentive to reduce recidivism. So they don't operate the prison so that it's in the best interest of the people who are impacted by the system.
The recidivism rate is extraordinary. As we saw, 42% of those people who are released come back as repeat offenders. Why does that happen, and what are some of the things that we can do to see to it that that doesn't continue to happen?
As I mentioned, we make people dependent. When you're in prison for long periods of time, you get used to having someone tell you what to do, how to do it, that you can't do this, you can't do that. We've cut down on prison programs so that people can't become educated. We know that education is one of the best ways to cut recidivism, but yet we cut educational programs in the prison. So when people come out, they are not rehabilitated, but I don't even like to use the word rehabilitate. I like to talk about empowerment. People have to be put in a position so that they have some control over their lives. They need to be educated, they need to have jobs. And when you come back out in the community, a lot of the people who come back find that jobs are no longer available to them because we stereotype people who come back into prisons. We're afraid of them. We discriminate against them. So they can't get on with their lives. They can't become productive members of our society. So I think we've got to look at how we punish people, that we continue to punish them once they come back into communities, that we must allow them to make a living, or otherwise they have no recourse but to engage in criminal activity.
And it is difficult for those people to get reintegrated into communities once they are released.
Absolutely. One of the things that's been exciting is that there are some prisoners inside the prison system now who are very concerned about how to empower people. And they look at the communities from which they come, and they say that we need to be involved in improving those communities so that we stop this vicious cycle. And so what they're trying to do is to go back into communities, work to improve the social, economic, political conditions of those communities that give rise to criminal behavior, along with their own personal behavior. They take responsibility for their personal behavior, but they're saying that there are other factors that cause criminal behavior, which we ignore.
Dr. Green, I know that you've been a minority activist for so long, and you've been out there working and been very vocal. Last year, capital punishment was reintroduced in New York State, and I know that you do believe that that is not, the capital punishment and the death penalty really are an issue that relate to race.
Absolutely. I think every study that's been done will show very clearly that anyone who is convicted, you have to look at the race of the defendant and the race of the victim. And it's 7 times more likely that a person will be convicted and executed if their victim was a white person. And there's a disproportionate number of those who are defendants who happen to be of color.
I would like to talk for another probably 4 hours at least. We're out of time, but I appreciate you coming down. I know the Center for Law and Justice gets involved in these issues and in many other,
yes.
And we're going to give people an opportunity to get more information by giving a phone number. So thanks very much for coming down this morning.
Well, thank you.
And if you would like to get in touch with Prison Fellowship, you can reach them at 370-1605. To contact the Center for Law and Justice, call 427-8361.
Inmates in New York prisons and county prisons. She was at that presentation to protest the governor's plan to build more prison cells. Why she was arrested remains a mystery, since she was apparently not disrupting the governor, but merely holding up a sign. Alice Green is our guest in studio tonight. Sans sign. Good to see you again.
Well,
how big was the sign?
Oh, it was a banner.
What did it say?
It said, "No more prisons. Not in Malone, not anywhere."
Why do you want no more prisons?
Well, I don't think New York State needs them. What it needs to do is to look at a couple of laws and make some changes. For instance, the Rockefeller drug laws are still in effect, and they are bringing into the system a large number of low-level drug offenders who are nonviolent. Also, the second felony offender law is doing the very same thing. And we're paying a lot of money for that. So we need to be looking at how we might change those laws so that the state can have more bed space for violent offenders.
What's your view of his idea of no parole for violent offenders?
Well, I think that's going to cause a problem inside the facilities. One of the things that I think helps in terms of keeping things cool inside is that prisoners can work towards getting released early. And if we're going to be putting more people in prison for longer periods of time, no possibility of parole, I think it's going to cause a lot of tension inside, and it's going to present problems for correctional officers as well.
The reason I asked is because they seem related. That if the governor wants to hold more people in prison for longer, then that's an idea why he needs more cells and more beds.
And I think that's probably one of the things he's going to be doing, is proposing more laws that will allow people to stay inside longer.
Excuse me, is it the governor or is it the public who are demanding this and he's simply responding? We've seen the polls, people overwhelmingly in favor of capital punishment. It didn't take George Pataki to do that. I mean, philosophically, all it took for him to do was implement the will of the people. Is that not what he's doing in prisons?
I think politicians believe that the public wants them to be more punitive than they actually have to be. If you look at New York State and actually around the country, we find that crime rates are going down, and it's getting harder and harder to justify why we need prison space. But I think it's economically driven
But
as
Alice,
well.
some people are arguing that the crime rate is going down because sentences got longer and tougher, and there's all this publicity about 3 strikes and you're out in California, that in fact it is the number of people in prison that's driving down the crime rate.
Not really. I don't think there is any direct relationship between incarceration and the crime rate. It simply depends on policy, their demographics. There are a lot of reasons why crime rates go up and down, and it's not as simple as prisons.
Do you think economy may have a bit to do with it? The fact that we're prospering at the moment?
I think there are those who would argue that the economy does. When there are more jobs available, there's less reason to be involved in criminal behavior, and so there's less crime. But we see in New York State that the violent crime is going down and general crime is going down.
One of the things I once argued with Alan Chartock, and he didn't agree, but I know I read this, is that one of the principal determiners of the crime rate is demographic.
Yes.
Number of
Absolutely.
teenagers, in
right.
effect.
And I think right now we're seeing that there's a lower percentage of young people in the population. In a few years it'll go up, and you probably see a rise in crime. We don't necessarily need prisons because we have a rise in crime. Because what we're finding is that the greatest number of people going into correctional facilities now are people who are drug offenders. As a matter of fact, 46.5% of all the commitments in New York State last year were drug offenders. And we're talking about nonviolent drug offenders. So we really don't, we can treat those people in the community and for much less of a cost.
Actually, I did a seminar for the governor 2 years ago with all his criminal justice people. Their conclusion was that we really don't have treatment programs for offenders, and that they agreed we should not be putting them in prison, but we have no alternative at the moment. Do you agree?
Well, right. We should be putting more money into it. I mean, we can develop them in those communities from which people come, and I think that's probably what we should be doing.
Do you have a problem with locking up violent offenders?
Oh, no, I think there are those people who cannot function in society at a particular time, and the public needs to be safe from those people. So I think we have to use prison for certain people. I'm not arguing that we don't need any prisons. I don't think we need any new construction in New York State now, because we can come up with
We can make room by freeing the people who are nonviolent.
Absolutely.
Prison's still overwhelmingly minority.
That's the other thing. We're concerned because prisons are increasingly becoming more and more African American and Latino, and it affects the African American community in a way that it doesn't affect white communities. White communities are basically benefiting from prisons being placed, particularly in upstate New York, in those rural communities where they are having economic problems. It's rescuing them, but it's really hurting African American and Latino communities.
You told me last time, and I was fascinated with the comment that many black men in our state prisons view the prison as the plantation from the Old South.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what it looks like, because most of the staff, people who are in charge, happen to be white, and of course those who are locked up happen to be black. And it's the same kind of relationship that existed on the plantation. Even with the drug offenders, right, we're finding that even though whites commit most of the drug abuse and use crimes, that 94% of those in prison right now happen to be African American and Latino, which is, I think, is an astounding figure.
It is an absolutely astonishing figure. Alice, it's always good seeing you. We'll have you back once you get out of whatever trouble. You don't expect to go to prison or anything.
Well, I would hope not.
I would hope not either. Have you asked why you were arrested?
No, I can't figure it out, because I was absolutely silent, was not making any noise, and simply began to unfurl a banner.
Right, and that was it.
That was it.
Good luck in court.
Thank you.
Alice Green from the Center for Law and Justice. Jenna's Law is the major piece of legislation I wanted to talk to after this block. But here in all three cases, we're seeing at least a request for law. Is this a good way to make law to react to specific crime events?
I think it's very bad. Social policy should never be made based on one particular incident. I think in Jenna's case, it was a real mistake. There was a lot of emotion involved in that. There was a lot of politicking going on. We saw it as basically the Willie Horton issue of this past campaign, that politicians were looking for an issue that they could take and run with, and Jenna's Law played right into their hands. It was not about parole, as I think people were led to believe. We did not look at what was happening in prisons. Instead, we focused on sentencing, and I think we got a very bad result. It means that more and more people are going to be in prison for longer periods of time, and it's going to be what drives the whole prison industry. And so I think it's a very, very bad law, and we've not had a chance to look at exactly what brought it about in terms of the emotion. But I think we're going to find down the road
that it was a mistake?
That it was a big mistake.
Tom, let me ask you, because I'm not sure I agree with Alice, that the politicians saw something they could get behind. It took a special session. It took considerable public outcry in order to force the Assembly and Sheldon Silver to pass it. It's almost as if the grease hoppers were able to get public support behind them before politicians. Do you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The grease hoppers are a very photogenic, very intelligent, very articulate couple. There's a reality of that emotional level. I would agree with Alice that you shouldn't make law on the basis of emotion. I'm essentially Burkean when it comes to that sort of thing. Law should be made because it is a rational decision, which is the wisest thing for the community. Right. The Lyles, for example, I have great sympathy for. I can't imagine how I would feel if one of my daughters were missing. On the other hand, whole bunches of people go missing.
Right.
We have a 72-hour delay period because the overwhelming percentage of them return. If you have to do a sort of massive search beginning within hours, then police effort is going to be distracted from, the most part, more urgent cases, because most people do come back. Life is unfair, Jack Kennedy said.
And he was right. George, what's going to happen in our prisons? That was one of the big concerns with Jenna's law. I mean, if I'm sentenced to 25 years and there's good behavior means nothing anymore, I can't get any time off, why should I behave?
Exactly, and I do think that I agree with Alice that this ad hoc approach is very bad in the criminal justice system. I mean, for years we've had a very skewed system because of the Rockefeller drug laws, where people spend 18 years to life. Admittedly,